"You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Isabella," my mother hissed as she watched me adjust my simple white dress in the mirror. "Marrying a janitor, what will people say?" I turned to face her, my hands trembling slightly as I held the small bouquet of daisies, the only flowers Marcus could afford. "They'll say I married the man I love." But as I walked down the aisle of that tiny chapel in Queens, New York, seeing the judgmental stares and whispered comments from my family and friends, I wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I was throwing away my future for a man who cleaned office buildings at night and barely made enough to pay rent. What I didn't know was that in less than 2 years, those same people would be begging for invitations to my dinner parties, and the man they mocked would be making headlines in Forbes magazine. This is the story of how love revealed the most extraordinary secret I never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Isabella Romano, and 2 years ago, I was a junior marketing executive at Hartwell & Associates, a mid-tier advertising firm in Manhattan. I had a corner cubicle, a decent salary, and what my Italian-American family considered good prospects. At 28, I was the success story they loved to brag about at Sunday dinners, the girl who'd made it out of our working-class neighborhood in the Bronx. But success felt hollow when you were working 60-hour weeks, eating takeout alone in your studio, apartment, and dating men who saw you as another trophy to collect. That's exactly where I was on that rainy Tuesday evening in October, when everything changed. I was the last person in the office, again. The cleaning crew had already arrived, and I barely glanced up from my computer screen when I heard the soft sound of a vacuum cleaner in the hallway. It was past 9 p.m., and I was drowning in a presentation for a client who wanted to launch an organic baby food line, but had the budget of a lemonade stand. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was gentle, with a slight accent I couldn't quite place. I looked up to see a man in his early 30s, wearing a navy blue janitor's uniform. He was tall, with kind brown eyes and an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry to bother you," he continued, "but I noticed you've been here very late several nights this week. The building's heat gets turned down after 10 p.m. and it gets quite cold. I thought you might want this." He held out a steaming cup of coffee and a small wrapped sandwich. I stared at him, completely taken aback. In 3 years of late nights at this office, not one of my colleagues had ever shown such thoughtfulness. "Thank you. You really didn't have to." "It's no trouble," he said, setting the coffee and sandwich on my desk. "I'm Marcus, by the way. Marcus Chen." "Isabella," I replied, suddenly aware of how tired I must look. "And thank you, really. This is incredibly kind." Marcus smiled, and there was something about it that made my heart skip. "My mother always said that hard work deserves respect no matter what form it takes. You're building something here, just like I am." As he walked away, pushing his cleaning cart down the hallway, I found myself watching him. There was something different about Marcus, a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself, the way he spoke. He didn't act like someone who felt lesser because of his job title. Over the next few weeks, our late-night encounters became routine. Marcus would always check on me, sometimes bringing coffee, sometimes just offering a word of encouragement when I looked particularly stressed. We began to talk, really talk, about everything from books to dreams to the small observations about life that most people never bother to share. I learned that Marcus had immigrated from Taiwan 5 years earlier, that he was working multiple jobs to support his younger sister's medical school education, and that despite his circumstances, he had an incredibly sharp mind and an almost encyclopedic knowledge of business and economics. "You know," I said one evening as he organized cleaning supplies in the supply closet, "you should be running companies, not cleaning them." Marcus paused, cloth in hand, and gave me a look I couldn't quite read. "Maybe someday," he said quietly. But there's honor in every honest job, Isabella. My father taught me that. It was during our 4th week of conversations that I realized I was falling for him. Not just attracted, though his gentle strength and genuine smile had definitely caught my attention, but truly, deeply falling in love. Marcus listened to me in a way no one ever had. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, remembered details about my family, and somehow made me feel like the most important person in the world during our brief interactions. The problem was, I had no idea how he felt about me. That changed on a Friday night in November. I was working late again, but this time it wasn't because of deadlines. It was because I was hoping to see Marcus. When he appeared in my doorway with his usual gentle smile, I made a decision that would change everything. "Marcus," I said, my heart pounding, "would you like to get coffee sometime? I mean, real coffee, not the office machine stuff, maybe on a weekend." His face lit up in a way that made my chest tight with hope. "I would love that, Isabella. How about tomorrow afternoon?" Our first date was at a small cafe in Chinatown. Marcus insisted on paying, even though I knew it probably represented a significant portion of his weekly earnings. We talked for 4 hours, and I discovered that behind his quiet demeanor was a brilliant mind that understood economics, technology, and human nature with remarkable clarity. "You know what I love about you?" Marcus said as we walked through the crowded streets afterward. "You see people, not just their jobs or their bank accounts. That's rare, especially in this city." "Is that why you've been so kind to me?" I asked. He stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression serious. "No, Isabella. I've been kind to you because from the moment I met you, I knew you were someone special, someone worth knowing." That night, as he walked me to the subway station, Marcus kissed me. It was soft and sweet and filled with promise, and I knew that whatever came next, I was all in. Over the following months, we became inseparable. Marcus would finish his night shift at the office building, and I would meet him for early morning breakfast before heading to work. On weekends, we explored the city together, often choosing free activities because of our tight budget. But finding joy in museums, parks, and long walks through different neighborhoods. My family's reaction was exactly what I'd expected. My mother, Teresa Romano, nearly fainted when I brought Marcus home for Sunday dinner. My father, a retired construction worker, was polite but distant. My 2 brothers made no effort to hide their disapproval. "Bella, honey," my mother said, pulling me aside in the kitchen, "he seems like a nice boy, but think about your future. You went to college, you have a good job. Don't you want a man who can provide for you?" "He does provide for me, Mom," I replied, helping her carry plates to the dining room. "Maybe not with money, but with everything else that matters." "Everything else doesn't pay the bills," she said, shaking her head. My friends were even worse. Sarah, my college roommate, was brutally direct. "Isabella, you could date lawyers, doctors, finance guys. Why are you settling for a janitor? Even..." My colleagues at work began to treat me differently once word spread about my relationship. The partner's wife, who had always been friendly at company events, suddenly became cold and distant. I overheard conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. But Marcus never let their reactions affect him. He was unfailingly polite to my family, patient with my friends' condescension, and supportive when I vented about the judgment we faced. "Do you ever regret this?" I asked him one evening as we shared takeout Chinese food in his small studio apartment in Flushing. "The way people look at us, the things they say." Marcus set down his chopsticks and reached for my hand. "Isabella, I've learned that people's opinions say more about them than about us. I know who I am, and I know what we have. That's enough." 6 months into our relationship, Marcus asked me to marry him. It wasn't the proposal I'd imagined as a little girl. No fancy restaurant, no expensive ring. We were sitting on a bench in Central Park, watching the sunset, when he turned to me with tears in his eyes. "I don't have much to offer you in terms of material things," he said, pulling a simple silver ring from his pocket. "But I can promise you my whole heart, my complete devotion, and a lifetime of working to build something beautiful together. Will you marry me?" The ring was small, and I later learned he'd saved for 3 months to buy it. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw something that all the money in the world couldn't buy: pure, honest, transformative love. "Yes," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Yes, absolutely yes." The engagement only intensified the criticism from my family and friends. My mother cried, my father gave me disappointed looks, and my brothers staged what they called an intervention to try to talk me out of it. "You're throwing your life away," my older brother Tony said. "This guy is going to hold you back from everything you could achieve." "What if I don't want to achieve anything without him?" I replied. "That's not love, Bella," my younger brother. Mike chimed in. "That's desperation." Their words stung, but they also strengthened my resolve. I realized that Marcus had taught me something important. True love wasn't about finding someone who looked good on paper or impressed your family at dinner parties. It was about finding someone who made you want to be better, who saw your potential, even when you couldn't see it yourself, and who stood by you when the world seemed against you. As our small wedding day approached, the pressure intensified. Friends stopped calling, family members made excuses not to attend, and I found myself increasingly isolated from the life I'd known before Marcus. But on the morning of our wedding, as I stood in that tiny chapel in Queens wearing a simple dress I'd bought off the rack, I felt nothing but certainty. Marcus was waiting for me at the altar in a borrowed suit, his eyes shining with love and promise. As I walked down the aisle, I could hear the whispers and see the disapproving faces, but I also saw Marcus's face, and in that moment I knew I was making the right choice. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Marcus had written his own vows, and as he spoke about building a life together based on love, respect, and shared dreams, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. "I promise to love you not for what you have, but for who you are," he said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "And I promise to work every day to be worthy of the gift of your love." As we kissed and turned to face our small gathering of guests, I caught sight of my mother dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Despite her reservations, she was crying, whether from sadness or joy, I couldn't tell. The reception was simple, cake and coffee in the chapel's small fellowship hall. But as Marcus and I danced to a song playing from someone's phone, swaying, slowly in the dim light, I felt like I was living in a fairy tale. "No regrets?" Marcus whispered in my ear as we danced. I pulled back to look at him, this man who had chosen me despite knowing the challenges we'd face, who had loved me without conditions or expectations. "None," I said firmly. "Not a single one." As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave for our modest honeymoon, a weekend at a bed and breakfast in the Catskills that Marcus had surprised me with, I realized that this was just the beginning. We had chosen each other, and that choice had required courage from both of us. But as we drove away from the chapel, Marcus's hand in mine, I had no idea that my new husband was harboring the most extraordinary secret, one that would change everything I thought I knew about love, sacrifice, and the true meaning of partnership. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first sign that something wasn't quite right about my new husband came 3 weeks after our honeymoon. I was rushing to catch the subway after another brutal day at Hartwell and Associates when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Running late tonight. Emergency at the Phoenix building. Don't wait up, the Phoenix building." I'd never heard him mention that location before. And in the 6 months we'd been together, Marcus had been meticulous about keeping me informed of his various cleaning assignments. He worked at our office building 3 nights a week, a medical center on weekends, and occasionally picked up extra shifts at residential complexes. But Phoenix Building, that was new. When I got home to our tiny one-bedroom apartment in Astoria, a place we'd found together after I'd given up my studio in Manhattan, I found Marcus hunched over his laptop at our small kitchen table. The moment he saw me, he quickly closed the screen. "Hey, beautiful," he said, standing to kiss me. "How was your day?" "Long," I replied, studying his face. There was something different about his expression, a tension I'd never seen before. "Everything okay at this Phoenix Building?" For just a split second, Marcus hesitated. "Yeah, just plumbing issues. Took longer than expected to clean up." I nodded, but something felt off. In all the time I'd known Marcus, he'd never been evasive about his work. He took pride in what he did, often telling me detailed stories about the office politics he observed or the interesting people he met during his shifts. Over the next few weeks, the mysterious late nights became more frequent. Marcus would disappear for hours at a time, always with vague explanations about emergency cleanups or special projects. His phone, which used to be an ancient flip phone that barely held a charge, was suddenly replaced with a sleek smartphone that he guarded carefully. "Where did you get that?" I asked one morning, watching him scroll through what looked like financial news on his new device. "Found a good deal online," he said quickly, putting the phone face down on the table. "My old one finally died completely." But the changes weren't just about mysterious absences and new technology. Marcus himself seemed different, more confident, more assured. He began speaking with an authority about business and economics that went beyond his usual insightful observations. During our weekend walks through the city, he would point out buildings and make comments about their architectural choices or strategic locations that seemed oddly specific. "That corner space would be perfect for a flagship retail location," he said one Saturday as we passed a construction site in Soho. "High foot traffic, excellent visibility from 3 directions, and the subway access makes it ideal for both tourists and locals." I stared at him. "How do you know so much about retail strategy?" Marcus caught himself, his cheeks flushing slightly. I read a lot during my downtime at work. Business magazines, online articles. You pick things up." The explanation made sense, but something in his tone suggested there was more to it. I began paying closer attention to these moments, and they were happening more frequently. Marcus would make offhand comments about market trends, discuss complex financial concepts with ease, or demonstrate knowledge about industries that seemed far beyond what someone could learn from casual reading. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in February. I had left work early, a rare occurrence, hoping to surprise Marcus with dinner from his favorite Thai restaurant. When I entered our apartment, I could hear him on the phone in the bedroom, speaking in a voice I'd never heard before. It was commanding, authoritative, with none of the gentle humility I'd come to associate with my husband. "The Shanghai deal needs to close by month end," he was saying. "I don't care what their lawyers are claiming about the environmental assessments. We have leverage they don't know about yet." I froze in the hallway, Thai food containers growing cold in my hands. Shanghai deal? Environmental assessments? What was Marcus talking about? "No, absolutely not," his voice continued, growing firmer. "We're not dropping the price another penny. If they want this partnership, they accept our terms. Otherwise, we walk and take the Beijing option." I stood there for several minutes, listening to my husband negotiate what sounded like a multi-million-dollar international business deal. The man I'd married worked night shifts cleaning office buildings and saved for months to buy me a simple engagement ring. Yet here he was, speaking with the confidence and knowledge of someone who'd been making major corporate decisions for years. When Marcus finally emerged from the bedroom, he looked startled to see me standing in the living room. "Isabella! You're home early." His voice had immediately shifted back to the gentle tone I knew, but his face was pale. "Who were you talking to?" I asked directly, setting the food containers on our coffee table. Work, he said quickly. My supervisor, we're reorganizing the cleaning schedules for some of the bigger accounts. The lie was so obvious, so clumsy, that it almost insulted my intelligence. Marcus, who had never been anything but completely honest with me, was clearly hiding something significant. Marcus, I said slowly, what's really going on? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd learned meant he was stressed, and sat down heavily on our small couch. For a long moment, he just stared at his hands. I can't tell you, he said finally. Not yet. Can't or won't, I asked, sitting down beside him. Can't, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Isabella, I know how this looks, and I know I'm asking a lot, but I need you to trust me just a little longer. I promise you. Everything I've told you about who I am and how I feel about you is completely true, but there are circumstances that I can't explain right now. I studied his face, searching for any sign of deception beyond the obvious secrecy. What I saw there was pain, conflict, and something that looked almost like fear. Are you in some kind of trouble? I asked. Because if you are, we can figure it out together. That's what marriage means. Marcus reached for my hands, holding them tightly. I'm not in trouble. I promise you that. But if I tell you the truth right now, it could complicate things in ways I'm not ready to handle yet. What kind of things? He was quiet for so long, I thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, things that could change how you see me, how you see us. That night we ate our Thai food in relative silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I found myself studying Marcus as if seeing him for the first time. The way he held himself, the way he analyzed the news on our small television, even the way he organized our modest belongings, everything seemed to hint at a background that was far more sophisticated than he'd ever let on. After Marcus fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions. Who was my husband, really? What was he hiding and why? Most importantly, what did this mean for us? The next few weeks were tense. Marcus continued to disappear for mysterious work assignments, and I found myself paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked. The way he always seemed to have cash when we needed it, despite his supposedly modest income. The fact that he never seemed stressed about money, even when I worried about our bills. The expensive-looking watch I'd once seen him quickly stuff into a drawer, claiming it was a gift from a former employer. I began to feel like I was living with a stranger. And the worst part was that I didn't know if I should be worried, angry, or hurt. Marcus was still the same loving, attentive husband he'd always been, but the secrecy was creating a wall between us that grew higher each day. The situation reached a crisis point on a Saturday morning in March. I was doing laundry when I found a business card that had fallen out of Marcus's jeans pocket. It was elegant, heavy stock with raised lettering that read, Phoenix Global Enterprises, Marcus Chen, Chief Executive Officer. I stared at the card for a full minute, convinced I was hallucinating. Chief Executive Officer? My husband, who cleaned office buildings and worried about the cost of groceries, was the CEO of a company called Phoenix Global Enterprises. With shaking hands, I grabbed my laptop and searched for the company online. What I found made my head spin. Phoenix Global Enterprises was a multinational consulting firm specializing in sustainable energy and environmental technology. Their website featured photos of gleaming office buildings, international partnerships, and testimonials from Fortune 500 companies. And there, on the leadership page, was a professional headshot of my husband. Not Marcus the janitor in his navy blue uniform, but Marcus Chen, CEO, wearing an impeccably tailored suit and looking every inch the successful business executive. According to his bio, Marcus had founded Phoenix Global 5 years earlier, after earning an MBA from Wharton and working for several major consulting firms. The company had offices in New York, Los Angeles, Shanghai, and London, with reported annual revenues in the hundreds of millions. I sat there in our tiny apartment, surrounded by our second-hand furniture and discount store dishes, trying to reconcile this information with the man I'd married, the man who had apologetically told me he could only afford a small wedding, the man who clipped coupons and worried about subway fare. My husband wasn't just hiding a secret, he was living an entirely different life. The sound of keys in the door made me slam the laptop shut. Marcus walked in carrying grocery bags and wearing his usual weekend outfit of jeans and a simple t-shirt. He looked so normal, so much like the man I'd fallen in love with, that for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined everything. "Hey, beautiful," he said, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. "I got those strawberries you like, and they were actually on sale." "Marcus," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. "We need to talk." He turned to look at me, and I saw the exact moment he noticed the business card in my hand. His face went completely white. "Isabella, Chief Executive Officer," I said, reading from the card. "Phoenix Global Enterprises, the same Phoenix building where you've been having all those mysterious emergencies." Marcus closed his eyes and leaned against the kitchen counter, as if the weight of his secret was finally too much to bear. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "About 5 minutes," I replied. "But I'm guessing you've known for considerably longer." When he opened his eyes, they were filled with a mixture of relief and terror. "I can explain everything." "I hope so," I said, standing up from the couch, "because right now, I don't know who I married." The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and my husband hung in the balance. The man I'd defended to my family and friends, the man I'd chosen despite everyone's disapproval, wasn't who he'd claimed to be. The question was, who was he really, and why had he been living this elaborate lie? Marcus sank into our worn armchair, the same one we'd bought together at a second-hand store just 2 months after our wedding. He buried his face in his hands, and for several long minutes, the only sound in our apartment was the distant hum of traffic from the street below. "I never wanted it to go this far," he said finally, his voice muffled. "The lie was only supposed to last a few weeks." I remained standing, the business card still clutched in my hand like evidence at a crime scene. "A few weeks? Marcus, we've been together for almost a year. We're married." He looked up at me then, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Vulnerability mixed with exhaustion, as if he'd been carrying an enormous weight for far too long. "Sit down, please," he said softly. "This is going to take a while." Against my better judgment, I perched on the edge of our couch, maintaining distance between us. "Start talking." Marcus took a deep breath, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Phoenix Global Enterprises is real. I did found it 5 years ago, and yes, I am the CEO. Everything you read online is true." He paused, running his hands through his hair. "But what you don't know is why I was working as a janitor in the first place." "I'm listening." 2 years ago, I discovered that someone inside my company was stealing from us. Not just petty theft, massive embezzlement. Millions of dollars were being siphoned off through fake consulting contracts and shell companies. The problem was, I didn't know who was responsible. It could have been anyone from my executive team to our financial advisors to our IT department. I frowned, trying to process this information. "So you decided to become a janitor?" I hired a private investigation firm, but after 6 months they had nothing concrete. Whoever was doing this was smart, careful, and had inside knowledge of our security systems. That's when I realized that the only way to catch them was to disappear from the executive level and observe from a place where I'd be completely invisible. Marcus stood up and began pacing our small living room, his movements restless and agitated. I told my board of directors and my most trusted senior staff that I was taking an extended sabbatical for health reasons. I appointed my VP of Operations, a woman named Sarah Liu, as interim CEO. Then I created a false identity and got a job with the cleaning company that serviced our building. You spied on your own employees? I gathered intelligence, he corrected. For 3 months, I worked the night shift in the Phoenix building, emptying trash cans, mopping floors, and listening to conversations that people thought no one else could hear. Do you know what I discovered? I shook my head, still trying to wrap my mind around the elaborate deception. The theft wasn't coming from inside Phoenix Global at all. It was being orchestrated by our cleaning company supervisor, a man named Derek Walsh, in partnership with someone from our accounting firm. They had been using their access to our offices to photograph sensitive documents, copy computer passwords, and plant listening devices in our conference rooms. The irony wasn't lost on me. So while you were pretending to be a janitor to catch a thief, you were actually working alongside the real thieves. Exactly. But by the time I figured that out, I had bigger problems. Marcus stopped pacing and looked directly at me. I met you. The simple statement hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to examine. At first, you were just a distraction, a pleasant part of an otherwise miserable assignment. But then I started looking forward to our conversations. You were kind to me, Isabella, not patronizing or condescending like most people are to service workers, but genuinely kind. You saw me as a person, not just someone invisible. Because I thought you were someone different than who you actually are, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. No, Marcus said firmly. That's where you're wrong. The man you fell in love with, the man who brought you coffee and listened to your problems and worried about making you happy, that's exactly who I am. The CEO title, the money, the corporate power, those are just tools I use to build something meaningful, but with you, I could just be myself. I stood up, agitation finally overcoming my shock. How can you say that? Everything about our relationship has been built on a lie. You let me defend you to my family while they called you a deadbeat. You let me worry about money while you're worth millions. You watched me scrimp and save for our wedding while you could have afforded anything I wanted. Because I needed to know, Marcus exploded, his composure finally cracking. Do you have any idea how many women have pursued me because of my money? How many relationships I've had that fell apart the moment I realized they were more interested in my bank account than in me as a person? So you decided to test me, like some kind of experiment? It wasn't supposed to be a test, he said, his voice quieter now. At least not at first. But when I realized I was falling in love with you, I needed to know that you could love me for who I really am, not for what I can provide. I stared at him, anger and hurt warring in my chest. And what gave you the right to make that decision for me? What gave you the right to lie to me every single day for almost a year? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. You're right. I didn't have that right. And I'm not asking you to forgive me? Good. Because I don't know if I can. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I couldn't take them back. The man sitting in front of me was a stranger. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship, our struggles, our dreams for the future, all of it had been based on an elaborate fiction. Tell me about the investigation, I said, needing to focus on concrete facts rather than the emotional devastation I was feeling. Did you catch them? Marcus nodded. 3 weeks after I started working at your building, I had enough evidence to turn Walsh and his accomplice over to the FBI. They're both in federal prison now, and we recovered about 80% of the stolen money. 3 weeks, I repeated. So you solved your business problem 3 weeks after we met. Why didn't you quit the janitor job then? Because of you, he said simply. I was falling in love with you, and I was terrified that if you knew the truth, everything would change. Everything has changed anyway. I know. Marcus sat back down, looking defeated. I kept telling myself I would tell you after our first date, then after our first month together, then after you said you loved me. But every milestone that passed made it harder, not easier. How do you tell someone you've been lying to them about everything? I walked to our small kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hands shaking slightly. Through the window, I could see normal people living their normal lives, unaware that my entire world had just been turned upside down. There's something else you need to know, Marcus said from behind me. I turned around, dreading whatever revelation was coming next. The reason I've been having so many emergencies lately isn't because I've been lying about where I am. It's because I've been trying to figure out how to transition back to being CEO without destroying what we have. What do you mean? Sarah Liu has been doing an excellent job as interim CEO, but she's ready to move on to start her own consulting firm. The board has been pressuring me to return, especially with some major international deals in the pipeline. I've been attending strategy meetings and conference calls, trying to manage the transition remotely. I set down my water glass, feeling overwhelmed. So you're planning to go back to being a CEO? I never stopped being a CEO, Isabella. I just took a very unconventional approach to solving a problem. But yes, I need to resume my public role at Phoenix Global. The question is... He paused, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. The question is whether you'll be part of that life. I don't even know what that means, I said honestly. This morning I woke up married to a janitor who worried about paying rent. Now I'm apparently married to a millionaire CEO who owns international businesses. The money doesn't matter. Of course it matters, I interrupted, not because I care about being rich, but because you made decisions about our entire relationship based on money. You decided what I could and couldn't know, what I could and couldn't have, who I could and couldn't be, all because you wanted to control how much your wealth influenced our relationship. Marcus was quiet, absorbing the truth of what I'd said. Do you love me? He asked finally. The question caught me off guard. I don't know, I answered honestly. I loved the man I thought you were. I don't know who you actually are. I'm the same person, Isabella. I brought you coffee when you worked late. I listened to your dreams and supported your goals. I held you when you cried about your family's disapproval. I married you in that little chapel because I wanted to spend my life with you. None of that was fake. But the context for all of it was fake, I replied. You weren't just being kind when you brought me coffee. You were testing whether I would be kind to a janitor. You weren't struggling alongside me to build a life together. You were watching to see if I would stick with you when times were hard. Everything that felt real to me was just data collection for you. That's not fair, isn't it? I asked. Tell me honestly, Marcus. If I had failed your test, if I had been rude to you, or if I had only started paying attention to you after I found out you were wealthy, would you have ended things? He hesitated, just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. You would have, I said. You would have walked away and written me off as another gold digger. But I never got to make that choice, did I? You decided for both of us what our relationship would be based on. I was trying to protect us. You were trying to protect yourself, I corrected. And in the process, you made me an unwitting participant. In your elaborate psychological experiment, Marcus stood up again, moving toward me. Isabella, please. I know I handled this badly, but I need you to understand. I need space, I said quickly, stepping away from him. I need time to think about all of this. How much time? I don't know. I grabbed my purse and jacket from the chair where I'd left them earlier, my mind already racing ahead to practical concerns. Where could I go? What could I afford on my own salary? How could I explain this to anyone? "Where are you going?" Marcus asked, panic creeping into his voice. "To my friend Sarah's apartment," I said. "I'll call you in a few days." "Isabella, wait," but I was already out the door, leaving behind the man I'd married and the life I'd thought we were building together. As I walked down the stairs of our building, I realized that I wasn't just leaving Marcus. I was leaving behind my entire understanding of who I was and what I wanted. The woman who had defended her choice to marry a janitor was gone. In her place was someone who had to figure out what it meant to be married to a CEO who had been pretending to be poor, and I had absolutely no idea where to start. Sarah Mitchell's apartment in Brooklyn Heights was everything mine wasn't. Spacious, modern, and decorated with the kind of furniture that came from actual stores rather than estate sales. As I sat on her pristine white couch at 2 a.m., clutching a mug of chamomile tea and explaining why I'd shown up at her door in tears, I felt like I was living someone else's nightmare. "Let me get this straight," Sarah said, curling up in the chair, across from me. "Your husband, the janitor that everyone said you were crazy to marry, is actually a multi-millionaire CEO who's been lying to you for your entire relationship." "That's the simplified version, yes." Sarah stared at me for a long moment, then burst into incredulous laughter. "Isabella, do you realize how insane this sounds? This is like something out of a soap opera." "Tell me about it," I muttered, taking another sip of tea. "This morning I was worried about whether we could afford to get our air conditioner fixed. Now I'm finding out my husband owns buildings." "Okay, but..." Sarah leaned forward, her expression shifting from amusement to confusion. "I mean, isn't this kind of amazing? You married for love, and it turns out he's rich. It's like winning the lottery." I looked at my best friend, my college roommate who had been one of the most vocal critics of my marriage, and realized she didn't understand at all. "Sarah," he lied to me. Every single day for almost a year, he looked me in the eye and lied about who he was, about everything. "But he did it because he loved you," she said, as if that explained everything. "He wanted to make sure you weren't a gold digger." "He made that decision without me," I said, my voice rising. "He decided I couldn't be trusted with the truth. He turned our entire relationship into a test that I didn't even know I was taking." Sarah was quiet for a moment, seeming to process this. "What are you going to do?" "I have no idea." The next 3 days passed in a blur of confusion and analysis. I called in sick to work, something I'd never done unless I was actually bedridden with flu. Instead, I spent my time walking through Brooklyn, sitting in coffee shops, and trying to make sense of my life. Marcus called every few hours, but I wasn't ready to talk to him yet. His voicemails grew increasingly desperate as the days passed. "Isabella, please just call me back. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but we need to talk about this. I've been thinking about what you said, and you're right. I made decisions about our relationship that I didn't have the right to make. But I love you, and I think we can work through this. It's been 2 days. I'm going crazy not knowing if you're okay. Sarah won't tell me anything except that you're safe. Please just let me know you're all right." On Thursday evening, as I sat in Sarah's living room mindlessly scrolling through my phone, something made me search for Phoenix Global Enterprises again. This time I didn't just read Marcus's biography. I dove deeper into the company's history, their projects, their mission statement. What I found surprised me. Phoenix Global wasn't just another consulting firm focused on maximizing profits. Their portfolio was filled with sustainable energy projects, environmental restoration initiatives, and partnerships with non-profit organizations in developing countries. They had helped build solar farms in rural Africa, designed water purification systems for communities in Southeast Asia, and consulted on urban planning projects that prioritized green spaces and public transportation. The company's mission statement Read, we believe that business success and social responsibility are not just compatible, but inseparable. Our goal is to prove that doing good and doing well can be the same thing. I found myself reading testimonials from village leaders in Kenya who credited Phoenix Global with bringing reliable electricity to their communities for the first time. There were quotes from mayors in small American cities who had worked with the company to transition from coal to renewable energy sources, creating jobs while reducing environmental impact. This wasn't the work of someone who was obsessed with money or power. This was the work of someone who was trying to make the world better. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Sarah Liu, interim CEO of Phoenix Global. I know this is unusual, but could we meet for coffee? I think there are some things about Marcus you should know. I stared at the message for a full minute before responding, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pick the place. Sarah Liu was nothing like what I had expected. Instead of a polished corporate executive, she was a woman in her late 30s, with laugh lines around her eyes and an easy smile. She wore jeans and a sweater, and when she stood up to greet me at the small cafe in Park Slope, she looked more like a teacher than a CEO. Thank you for meeting me, she said, as we sat down with our coffee. I know this must be incredibly overwhelming. That's putting it mildly, I replied. How did you get my number? Marcus gave it to me. He's been a wreck since you left, but he was very clear that I shouldn't contact you unless I thought it was important. Sarah paused, studying my face. I think it's important. Why? Because I've worked with Marcus for 7 years, and I've never seen him care about anything the way he cares about you. And because I think you deserve to know the whole story, not just the parts he's told you. I leaned back in my chair, skeptical. He sent you to do damage control. Actually, no. He doesn't know I'm here. He'd probably be furious if he found out. Sarah smiled slightly. Marcus likes to handle his personal problems the same way he handles business problems, by himself, with complete control over every variable. But this isn't a business problem. Then why are you here? Sarah was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose her words carefully. 5 years ago, when Marcus started Phoenix Global, I was a junior consultant at a firm that specialized in environmental impact assessments. I was smart, I was ambitious, and I was completely broke because I'd been putting every penny I earned toward paying off my student loans. I nodded, not sure where this was going. Marcus hired me for a project in Oregon, a wind farm development that was being opposed by local environmental groups. My job was supposed to be rubber stamping the project so his client could move forward with construction. But when I did the actual assessment, I discovered that the proposed location would disrupt the migration patterns of several endangered bird species. Any responsible scientist would have recommended against the project. Sarah took a sip of her coffee, her expression growing serious. I was terrified to tell Marcus. This was my first major consulting gig, and I knew that if I opposed the project, I'd probably get fired and blacklisted from the industry. I was 28 years old with no connections and $80,000 in debt. I couldn't afford to lose the job. What did you do? I wrote 2 reports, she said. One that recommended against the project, and one that approved it. I figured I'd give Marcus the approval and keep my mouth shut. I waited for her to continue, sensing this story was going somewhere important. But when I met with Marcus to present my findings, something made me tell him the truth. Maybe it was the way he asked questions, or the way he actually listened to my answers, but I ended up showing him both reports and explaining why I'd considered lying. Sarah smiled at the memory. Marcus looked at both reports for about 5 minutes. Then he closed the folder and said, "We're recommending against the project," just like that. He was willing to lose a 7-figure client because it was the right thing to do. That must have been expensive, I said. It was. But Marcus told me something that day that I've never forgotten. He said, If we're not making the world better, then what's the point of any of this? I felt something shift in my chest, a small crack in the wall of anger I'd built around my heart. That's not the end of the story, Sarah continued. Marcus didn't just recommend against the wind farm. He spent the next 6 months working with the environmental groups and the development company to find an alternative location that would work for everyone. He did it for free because he said it was his responsibility to find solutions, not just identify problems. Why are you telling me this? Because the man you married, the one who brought you coffee and worried about your happiness, that's who Marcus really is. The CEO title and the money are just tools he uses to do work that matters to him. But the person underneath all of that is exactly who you fell in love with. I stared into my coffee cup, processing this information. But he still lied to me about everything. Yes, he did, Sarah agreed, and that was wrong. I'm not here to make excuses for him or to convince you to forgive him. I'm here because I think you deserve to know that when Marcus talks about you, it's not as someone who passed a test or proved herself worthy. It's as someone who changed his life. What do you mean? Sarah hesitated, as if debating whether to share something personal. Marcus has always been brilliant at business, but he's never been great at people. He approaches relationships the same way he approaches problems, analytically, carefully, with contingency plans for every possible outcome. That's exactly what he did with me. At first, yes, but somewhere along the way, you stopped being a problem to solve and started being a person he couldn't imagine living without. The man I've worked with for 7 years would never have spent months pretending to be a janitor just to spend time with someone. He would have revealed his identity the moment he decided you were trustworthy and moved on with his life. I looked up at Sarah, surprised by the certainty in her voice. Marcus didn't keep lying to you because he was testing you, she said gently. He kept lying because he was terrified of losing you. And yes, that was selfish and wrong and unfair to you. But it wasn't calculating. It was desperate. We sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Sarah spoke again. There's something else you should know. Marcus submitted his resignation from Phoenix Global yesterday. I jerked my head up, shocked. What? He told the board that he couldn't continue as CEO while his personal life was in chaos. He's recommending me as his permanent replacement. But it's his company, his life's work, Sarah shrugged. He said that without you, none of it matters to him anymore. I felt tears prick at my eyes, caught between anger and heartbreak. Even now, even after everything, Marcus was making dramatic gestures without consulting me. I should go, I said, standing up abruptly. Isabella, Sarah called as I gathered my things. For what it's worth, I think he really loves you. Not the idea of you, not what you represent. You. The woman who was kind to a janitor, who stood up to her family for what she believed in, who saw through all the surface stuff to who he really was underneath. But how can I trust that? I asked. How can I trust anything he says when our entire relationship started with a lie? Sarah was quiet for a moment. I guess you'll have to decide if the man he is now is worth the risk of finding out. As I walked back to Sarah's apartment, my mind was spinning with everything I'd learned. Marcus wasn't just a wealthy man who had pretended to be poor. He was someone who had built his entire career around trying to make a positive impact on the world. He wasn't just a CEO who had tested his wife. He was someone who was apparently willing to give up everything he'd worked for rather than live without her. But none of that changed the fundamental problem. He had lied to me every day. For almost a year, he had looked me in the eye and lied about who he was. The question I couldn't answer was whether love, even real, transformative love, was enough to overcome that betrayal. As I climbed the stairs to Sarah's apartment, I realized I was going to have to find out. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, jarring me awake from the first decent sleep I'd had in 5 days. Sarah's guest bedroom was still dark, and for a moment I forgot where I was and why I wasn't in my own bed beside Marcus. "Isabella?" The voice was frantic, unmistakably my mother's. "Isabella, what is going on? I'm looking at the New York Business Journal online, and there's a picture of you and Marcus on the front page." I sat up abruptly, my heart racing. "What are you talking about?" "It says here that Marcus Chen, CEO of Phoenix Global Enterprises, has resigned from his position amid speculation about personal difficulties. They have a wedding photo of you two, Isabella. It says you're married to a CEO." My blood turned to ice. I scrambled for my laptop, typing frantically, while my mother continued talking in the background. "Don't understand what's happening. Yesterday you were married to a janitor, and now they're saying he's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. How is this possible?" The Business Journal's website loaded, and there it was, a professional headshot of Marcus in an expensive suit next to our wedding photo from 8 months ago. The headline read, "Phoenix Global CEO abruptly resigns, citing personal reasons." The article was accompanied by speculation about company instability and quotes from unnamed board members expressing concern about the sudden leadership change. But it was the sidebar article that made my stomach drop. The secret marriage. How? CEO Marcus Chen kept his wife hidden from the business world. "Mom, I have to go," I said, ending the call before she could ask more questions. My phone immediately started buzzing with notifications, text messages, missed calls, social media alerts. With trembling fingers, I opened Twitter and searched for Marcus's name. The results were overwhelming. Deshaun's secret CEO was trending. Financial bloggers were speculating about hidden assets and tax implications. Gossip sites were calling it the Cinderella story of the year. Someone had even found our wedding announcement in the Queen's Chronicle and was sharing screenshots alongside Marcus's Forbes profile. But the worst part was the comments. Hundreds of strangers were dissecting our relationship, our marriage, and my motivations. She must have known who he really was. "No one is that naive. Gold digger alert. She's probably getting millions in the divorce. This whole 'I thought he was a janitor' story is obviously fake. She's trying to control the narrative. Plot twist. She's the one who leaked it to get attention." My phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number with a New York area code. "Ms. Romano? This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We'd love to get your side of the story about your husband's surprise resignation and your unique love story." I hung up immediately, but the phone rang again within seconds. Then again, and again. Sarah emerged from her bedroom in her pajamas, looking concerned. "Everything okay? Your phone has been going crazy." I showed her the laptop screen and watched her eyes widen as she read the headlines. "Oh, Isabella," she said softly. "This is everywhere. Over." The next 2 hours, the story exploded across every major news outlet. Financial networks were analyzing the impact on Phoenix Global's stock price. Celebrity gossip shows were calling it the romance of the decade. Morning talk shows were debating whether I was a victim or a co-conspirator. By 9 a.m., there were photographers camped outside Sarah's building. "You can't stay here," Sarah said, peering through her blinds at the crowd gathering on the sidewalk. "They're going to figure out you're here eventually." My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. There's a car waiting for you at the back entrance of Sarah's building. Driver's name is David Chen, my cousin. He'll take you somewhere safe." Another message followed immediately. "You don't have to see me or talk to me, but please don't face this alone." I stared at the messages, torn between anger and gratitude. Even now, Marcus was trying to protect me from consequences of his choices. 20 minutes later, I was in the back seat of a black sedan, speeding through Queens toward an unknown destination. David Chen was a quiet man in his 50s who offered no information beyond assuring me that Marcus had asked him to take me somewhere the press couldn't follow. We drove for over an hour, eventually turning into the driveway of a modest house in Westchester County. The yard was well maintained, but not ostentatious, and the two-story colonial looked like it belonged to a comfortable middle-class family rather than a CEO. "Whose house is this?" I asked as David carried my hastily packed bag to the front door. "Mine," said a voice from behind me. I turned to see Marcus emerging from a gardening shed, dirt on his hands and wearing clothes I'd never seen before. Faded, jeans and a flannel shirt that had clearly seen years of use. He looked tired, older somehow, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "This is your house?" I asked, confused. "I bought it 3 years ago," he said, not coming any closer. "I've been renovating it myself on weekends. It's where I come when I need to think, or when the city gets too overwhelming." I looked around the property with fresh eyes. The vegetable garden, the half-finished deck, the old pickup truck parked beside the house, none of it fit with the image of a wealthy CEO that had been forming in my mind. "David, thank you," Marcus said to his cousin. "I'll call you later." After David left, we stood facing each other in the afternoon sunlight, the first time we'd been alone since I'd discovered his secret. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything that had been said and everything that still needed to be addressed. "How bad is it?" I asked finally. "Bad," Marcus admitted. "The board is panicking. Stock prices are down 12%, and there are rumors that our biggest client is considering pulling out of their contract because you resigned." "Because I resigned without explanation at a critical time in the company's development. Our Shanghai project was supposed to be announced next week, and our London office is in the middle of negotiations for a major wind farm development in Scotland." I felt a pang of guilt, which immediately made me angry. "This isn't my fault. No," Marcus said quickly. "None of this is your fault, Isabella. This is entirely on me." "Then why did you resign? Sarah Lou told me you just walked away from everything." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his. "Tell for stress. Because I realized that I've spent so much time building Phoenix Global that I forgot why I started it in the first place. I wanted to create something meaningful, something that would make a positive impact. But somewhere along the way, it became about success and growth and proving myself." He paused, looking directly at me for the first time since I'd arrived. "You reminded me what really matters. Not the company, not the money, not even the good work we do, but the connections we make with other people. The ways we choose to love and trust and support each other. So you threw it all away," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I protected what matters most," he corrected, "or at least I tried to." I walked to the edge of the deck, looking out over the peaceful yard that was so different from anything I'd associated with Marcus the CEO. "The whole world thinks I'm either a gold digger or an idiot." "They're wrong." "Are they?" I turned to face him. I didn't know my own husband's real identity. That doesn't exactly make me look perceptive. Marcus stepped closer, and I could see the pain in his eyes. "Isabella, you knew me better than anyone ever has. You knew that I was someone who cared about doing meaningful work. You knew that I valued kindness over status. You knew that I was more interested in late-night conversations than expensive restaurants. But I didn't know you were lying to me." "No," he said quietly. "You didn't know that, and I will regret that choice for the rest of my life." We stood there in silence, the weight of the media frenzy and public speculation pressing down on both of us. Finally, Marcus spoke again. "There's something else you need to know. The board has given me an ultimatum." "What kind of ultimatum?" "Return as CEO within 72 hours, or they'll remove me permanently and restructure the company. They're saying my resignation was a breach of my fiduciary duty to shareholders." I stared at him. Can they do that? Legally, it's complicated. But practically, yes. If I don't return by Friday, I'll lose control of Phoenix Global entirely. And you'll lose everything you've worked for. Marcus nodded. Everything except what matters most. The implication hung in the air between us. He was choosing me over his life's work, and the pressure of that choice was almost unbearable. Marcus, I said slowly, you can't make this decision because of me. You can't give up your company because you feel guilty about lying. I'm not giving it up because I feel guilty, he said. I'm giving it up because I realize that none of it means anything if I don't have you to share it with. That's not fair, I said, my voice rising. You can't put that responsibility on me. You can't make me the reason you destroy your life's work. Then come back with me, he said suddenly. Come back and be part of Phoenix Global. Help me rebuild it into something even better. I shook my head. I can't just step into your CEO world and pretend to belong there. You do belong there, Marcus said with surprising intensity. Do you know what Sarah Liu told me yesterday? She said that in one conversation with you, she learned more about leadership and integrity than she had in months of board meetings. She was being nice. She was being honest. Isabella, you have incredible instincts about people and business. You understand what it means to work for something you believe in. You could be an amazing partner in this. I felt overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was suggesting. I'm a junior marketing executive, Marcus. I don't know anything about running a multinational company. Neither did I when I started, but I had good advisors, and I learned as I went. More importantly, I had a vision for what I wanted to create. You could help me refine that vision, make it better, make it more meaningful. I looked at this man who had been both stranger and husband to me, who had lied about his identity but never about his values, who was now offering to share everything he'd built. I need time to think, I said finally. The board meets Friday at 9 a.m. I know. Marcus nodded, accepting my need for space even as I could see the fear in his eyes. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that marrying you was the best decision I've ever made. Even if you can't forgive me, even if you decide you don't want this life, I will never regret choosing you. As the sun began to set over the peaceful property that represented yet another side of Marcus, I was only just discovering. I realized that the question wasn't whether I could forgive him for lying about being a janitor. The question was whether I was brave enough to step into a life I'd never imagined for myself, with a man who had shown me that love sometimes meant taking risks I never thought I'd be willing to take. Thursday morning arrived grey and overcast, matching my mood as I sat at Marcus's kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop open to yet another news article about our fairy tale romance gone public. The house felt different in daylight, lived in, comfortable, with hand-built shelves and mismatched furniture that spoke of someone who cared more about function than appearance. Marcus had left early for what he called damage control meetings in the city, giving me space to think while he tried to salvage what remained of Phoenix Global's stability. The silence should have been peaceful, but instead it amplified the chaos in my mind. My phone buzzed with a call from my boss at Hartwell & Associates. Isabella. Richard Hartwell's voice was carefully neutral. I think we need to discuss your current situation. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Well, it's come to our attention through various media reports that you're married to Marcus Chen, the CEO of Phoenix Global Enterprises. This creates some complications. What kind of complications? Phoenix Global is one of our competitors for the Meridian Energy account we've been pursuing. Having an employee who's married to their CEO raises serious conflict of interest. Concerns. I closed my eyes, realizing I hadn't even considered how this revelation would affect my own career. Richard, I had no idea Marcus was— I believe you, he interrupted, but perception matters in this business. The client is already asking questions, and our other employees are concerned about fairness and confidentiality. The conversation that followed was polite but devastating. By the time I hung up, I was on unpaid administrative leave, pending a review of the situation. In less than a week, I'd lost not just my understanding of my marriage, but potentially my job as well. I was still processing this latest blow when an unexpected visitor arrived. Through the front window, I watched a silver Tesla pull into the driveway, and out stepped a woman I recognized from photos, but had never met in person, Dr. Elena Vasquez, the environmental scientist whose solar farm project in Guatemala had been featured prominently on Phoenix Global's website. She knocked on the door with the confidence of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "Ms. Romano, I'm Elena Vasquez. I worked with your husband on sustainable energy projects in Central America. May I come in?" I led her to the living room, curious about why she'd driven all the way from the city to see me. "I'll be direct," Dr. Vasquez said, settling into the worn leather chair that Marcus obviously favored. "The scientific community is watching what happens to Phoenix Global very closely. Marcus's company has been the bridge between academic research and real-world implementation for dozens of crucial environmental projects. I understand he does important work." "No, I don't think you do understand," she interrupted, but not unkindly. "Let me tell you about Santa Rosa." Dr. Vasquez pulled out her phone and showed me photos of a small village surrounded by lush green mountains. This community in Guatemala had been without reliable electricity for over 50 years. The government had no plans to extend power lines to such a remote area, and the villagers couldn't afford generators or solar panels on their own. She swiped to the next photo, rows of gleaming solar panels arranged in a field beside the village. Marcus didn't just fund this project. He spent 3 weeks living in the village, learning about their specific needs, their cultural practices, their concerns about outside interference. He worked with local leaders to design a system that would be sustainable, both environmentally and economically. The next photos showed children doing homework under electric lights, a small medical clinic with refrigeration for vaccines, and women using electric sewing machines to create textiles for sale in larger markets. "This project has transformed the lives of 300 people, Dr. Vasquez continued, but it's just one of 47 similar projects that Phoenix Global has completed or is currently developing. If the company collapses because Marcus walks away, all of that work stops." I studied the photos, seeing the human faces behind the corporate mission statements I'd read online. "Dr. Vasquez, why are you telling me this?" "Because Marcus told Sarah Liu that he was considering not returning to the company, because the board meeting is tomorrow, and the future of all these projects hangs in the balance, and because I think you deserve to know that your husband isn't just a successful businessman. He's someone who's actually changing the world." After she left, I found myself walking through Marcus's vegetable garden, trying to process everything I'd learned. The man who had lied to me about being a janitor was the same person who lived in villages without electricity to understand how to help them. The CEO who had tested my character was also someone who spent his wealth on projects that might never turn a profit but could transform entire communities. My phone rang. My mother, again. "Isabella, I need to understand what's happening," she said without preamble. "Your father and I have been getting calls from reporters asking about you and Marcus. They want to know if we knew he was rich, if we approved of the marriage, what we think about the whole situation." "What did you tell them?" "Nothing." We hung up. "But Isabella, people are saying terrible things about you online. They're calling you a liar, saying you must have known about the money." I could hear the pain in her voice, and I realized that this scandal wasn't just affecting Marcus and me, it was hurting everyone who loved us. "Mom, I really didn't know. I believe you, sweetheart. But what I can't understand is, what happens now? Do you stay married to him? Do you divorce him? Do you become some kind of rich socialite? This isn't the life we raised you for." Her words hit something deep inside me. She was right. Nothing about this situation matched the life I'd been raised to expect. I'd been taught to work hard, to be independent, to earn what I had. The idea of stepping into wealth I hadn't created felt foreign and uncomfortable. But then I thought about the photos Dr. Vasquez had shown me, about the projects that might never happen if Phoenix Global collapsed, about the communities that would remain without electricity or clean water because I was too proud or too hurt to help Marcus save his company. "I don't know, Mom," I said honestly. "I don't know what happens now." That evening, Marcus returned from the city looking exhausted and defeated. He moved around the kitchen preparing dinner with mechanical precision, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the worry in his eyes. "How bad was it?" I asked. 3 major clients called emergency meetings to reassess their partnerships," he said, not looking up from the stove. "The Shanghai project is on hold indefinitely. 2 board members are threatening to sue me personally for breach of fiduciary duty. And if you go back tomorrow, if I go back and convince them I'm stable and committed, we might be able to salvage most of it. Sarah Liu has been doing incredible work trying to hold everything together, but she can't make the big strategic decisions without board approval." A dinner in relative silence, both lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Elena Vasquez came to see you today." I looked up, surprised. "How did you know?" "She texted me afterward. Said she thought I was an idiot for risking everything, but that she hoped you understood what was at stake. She showed me the photos from Guatemala." Marcus nodded. "That project is one of my favorites. Not because of the technology. The solar array is actually pretty standard, but because of what it meant to the people there. The village leader, a woman named Rosa Morales, told me that her granddaughter wants to be an engineer now because she's seen what renewable energy can do." "Marcus," I said carefully, "I lost my job today." His fork clattered against his plate. "What?" I explained the conversation with Richard Hartwell, watching Marcus's expression grow darker with each detail. "I'll call him," Marcus said immediately. "I'll explain that you had nothing to do with any potential conflicts." "No," I said firmly. "You can't fix this for me. If I'm going to navigate this new reality, I need to do it myself." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "What does that mean?" I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would change everything. "It means I've made a decision about tomorrow." I could see him tense, preparing for whatever blow was coming. "I'm going with you to the board meeting." The relief that flooded his face was so intense it almost broke my heart. "Isabella, but," I continued, holding up a hand to stop him, "I'm not going as your wife who's forgiven you and wants to play house in your CEO world. I'm going as someone who's seen what Phoenix Global actually does, and who thinks those projects are too important to fail because of our personal problems." Marcus stared at me across the small kitchen table. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I don't know if I can trust you as a husband yet. I don't know if I can forgive you for lying to me, or if our marriage can survive what you've put us through." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "But I do know that Dr. Vasquez was right. The work you do matters too much to sacrifice for personal reasons. So you'll help me save the company. I'll help you transition back to being CEO, and I'll support the company's mission. But Marcus, this doesn't mean we're okay. This doesn't mean I'm ready to step into some fairy tale where everything works out because you turned out to be rich." He nodded slowly, understanding the distinction I was making. "What would it mean for us?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "Maybe we figure out how to rebuild trust while working together. Maybe we discover that we're better as business partners than as spouses. Maybe we learn that love really can overcome deception, or maybe we learn that some lies are too big to forgive." I stood up from the table, suddenly needing space to breathe. "But what I do know is that tomorrow morning we're going to walk into that boardroom together, and we're going to convince them that Phoenix Global has a future. Because those solar panels in Guatemala are more important than my hurt feelings. And that medical clinic with vaccine refrigeration is more important than your guilt. Marcus stood as well, and for a moment we faced each other across the kitchen. Two people whose lives had been turned upside down, trying to find a path forward that honored both the love that had brought us together and the betrayal that had torn us apart. "Thank you," he said simply. "Don't thank me yet," I replied. "Tomorrow we find out if we can actually do this. If we can work together despite everything that's happened. If we can save your company without destroying what's left of our marriage." I paused at the doorway to the guest room where I'd been sleeping. "And Marcus, after tomorrow, after we handle the board and the media and the business crisis, we're going to have a very different conversation about trust and honesty and what it means to be married to someone. Because saving Phoenix Global is one thing, saving us is going to be much harder." As I closed the door behind me, I realized that I wasn't just preparing for a board meeting. I was preparing to step into a life I'd never imagined, with a man I was still learning to know, fighting for a future that might include both love and forgiveness, or might teach me that some betrayals are too deep to overcome. Tomorrow would tell us which it would be. The auditorium at Columbia University was packed with environmental science students, sustainability advocates, and business leaders. As I stood backstage, adjusting my notes for the keynote speech I was about to deliver, I could hardly believe how much my life had changed in just 6 months. "5 minutes, Ms. Chen," the event coordinator said, using the professional name I'd adopted for my work at Phoenix Global. It still felt strange, but it represented the new identity I'd built, not just as Marcus's wife, but as someone who had carved out her own space in the world of sustainable business. Through the curtain, I could see Marcus in the front row, looking proud and nervous in equal measure. Beside him sat Dr. Elena Vasquez, Martha Hendricks, and Sarah Liu, who had become not just colleagues, but genuine friends. The board's 6-month review had been unanimous. Phoenix Global was more stable and focused than ever, and my position as Director of Community Impact had been made permanent. "Ladies and gentlemen," the moderator announced, "please welcome Isabella Chen, Director of Community Impact and Corporate Ethics at Phoenix Global Enterprises." As I walked onto the stage, the applause was warm and genuine. I looked out at an audience that included some of the brightest minds in environmental science and felt a moment of vertigo. A year ago, I'd been working late nights in a cubicle, worried about impressing clients who sold baby food. Now I was speaking to future leaders about how business could be a force for positive change. 6 months ago, I began, most of you had never heard of me. I was a junior marketing executive married to a man I thought was a janitor. Today, I'm here to talk about what I've learned about authenticity, accountability, and the power of unexpected partnerships. I told them about the Guatemala project, which had expanded to include 3 additional villages. I talked about our new water purification initiative in Bangladesh and the wind farm project in Scotland that was ahead of schedule and under budget. But mostly I talked about what I'd discovered about the intersection of personal values and professional mission. "The most important lesson I've learned," I said as my speech drew to a close, "is that the best partnerships, whether in business or in life, aren't built on perfect understanding or complete trust from day one. They're built on the willingness to choose each other again and again, even when it's difficult." During the Q&A session, a young woman in the 3rd row raised her hand. "Ms. Chen, how do you balance holding your husband accountable professionally when you're also rebuilding trust in your marriage?" It was a question I'd been asked in various forms dozens of times over the past few months, and I'd developed a thoughtful response. The beautiful thing about having clearly defined professional roles is that it gives us a framework for working together that doesn't depend on the status of our personal relationship, I said. In the boardroom, I'm not Marcus's wife. I'm someone whose job it is to ensure Phoenix Global stays true to its mission. That clarity has actually made both our professional and personal partnerships stronger. After the event, Marcus and I walked through Central Park as the evening air grew cool. It had become our tradition. After every major presentation or company milestone, we'd take time to decompress together, away from the pressures of corporate life. "You were incredible up there," Marcus said, reaching for my hand. "I still can't believe you created that position and made it so essential to the company in just 6 months. "We created it," I corrected, "and it's essential because we make it essential every day." We found a bench overlooking the reservoir and sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The question that had been asked earlier was still on my mind. "Marcus," I said eventually, "do you ever regret telling me the truth? Do you ever think about how much simpler things would have been if you just stayed in character as the janitor?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "Simple isn't the same as good," he said finally. "Yes, everything would have been easier if I'd never told you about Phoenix Global, but it also would have been built on a foundation that would have eventually collapsed." "How do you know?" "Because the woman I fell in love with is someone who demands authenticity from the people around her. Eventually, you would have seen through the lie, and when you did, the betrayal would have been even worse than what we went through." I leaned against his shoulder, still sometimes surprised by how natural it felt, despite everything we'd been through. "Do you think we're okay now? Really okay?" "I think we're different than we were before," Marcus said carefully. "I think we're more honest with each other, more intentional about our choices. Whether that makes us okay depends on how you define it." I considered this. Our marriage now included regular conversations about corporate ethics, joint decisions about company direction, and public scrutiny that would have terrified me a year ago. We'd had to rebuild our relationship while simultaneously learning to work together in a high-pressure environment. It wasn't the simple love story I'd imagined when I married a janitor, but it was something deeper and more complex. "I think," I said slowly, "that we're better than okay. I think we're real. Even with all the complications, the media attention, the corporate responsibilities, the fact that your family still doesn't quite know what to make of our situation." I laughed, thinking about my mother's latest phone call. She'd been simultaneously proud of my Columbia speech and worried about whether all this success was changing me too much, especially with all the complications. Anyone can be happy when everything is simple. It takes real partnership to build something meaningful when everything is difficult. As we walked home to our apartment in Manhattan, we'd finally moved out of the Astoria place. Though Marcus had kept the Westchester house as our weekend retreat, I reflected on how different this life was from anything I'd ever imagined for myself. I was no longer the woman who had defended her choice to marry a poor janitor to skeptical family and friends. But I wasn't just the wife of a wealthy CEO either. I'd become something entirely new, a professional voice for ethical business practices, a partner in work that was changing communities around the world, and someone who had learned that the most important thing in any relationship isn't avoiding deception, but choosing to build something honest and meaningful together after the deception is revealed. The story that had started with everyone laughing at me for marrying beneath my station had evolved into something none of us could have predicted. I'd married a janitor who turned out to be a CEO, but more importantly, I'd married someone who was willing to grow and change and build a life based on shared values rather than shared illusions. And in the end, that made all the difference. 3 months later, as I stood in another village in Guatemala watching children attend school in a building powered by Phoenix Global's solar grid, I received a text from my friend Sarah back in Brooklyn. Saw the Times article about your water project in Ghana. Remember when you thought you were just marrying a janitor? I typed back, I did marry a janitor. He just happened to be other things too. Turns out that's the best kind of love, the kind that leaves room for people to be surprising. As the sun set over the mountains surrounding the village, Marcus joined me in watching the first evening in this community's history, where every home had electric lights. Tomorrow we'd fly back to New York, back to board meetings and quarterly reports, and the complex dance of running a company that tried to balance profit with purpose. But tonight, in this quiet moment of witnessing the impact of work we'd built together, I knew that every difficult choice, every moment of doubt, every challenge we'd faced had been worth it. Because sometimes the most extraordinary love stories aren't about finding someone perfect. They're about choosing to build something meaningful with someone real. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.